The Western Front in November 1916 is not a battlefield. It is a system. A machine built out of mud and timber and wire and the specific mathematics of attrition, the calculated destruction of men at a rate just sustainable enough to continue. From above it looks like scars. From inside it looks like everything. You have been at the fire step for 4 hours. Your eyes have learned to exist above the parapet in a way that requires almost nothing from you now. The scanning is automatic, the threat assessment is automatic, the readiness is automatic. The parts of you that used to think about other things have been temporarily reassigned. 9 days without sleep. Not 9 days without closing your eyes. 9 days without the specific event that sleep actually is, the disengagement of the threat monitoring system, the body's agreement to be temporarily unavailable. Your body has not agreed to that in 9 days. Your body no longer trusts the conditions enough to make that agreement. The trench holds 11 men and all 11 men's histories and all 11 men's versions of a life that exists somewhere else and is currently suspended. The trench holds all of this in 14 feet of depth and 4 feet of width, and it does not complain about the crowding. The rats are not vermin. That is the first correction the trench makes to everything you understood before you arrived here. The rats are residents. You are the temporary element. They will be here when the mud fills back in. They are in no hurry. Sergeant Howell has been in this trench system since October 1914. That is 25 months. That is 760 days of the specific physics of this environment. Whatever Howell was before he arrived here has been completely replaced by what the Western Front required him to become. The replacement was total. Howell does not appear to mourn it. No man's land is not empty. That is the lie the name tells. No man's land contains everything that has been placed there by both sides over 2 years of occupation, wire, stakes, craters, and what the craters contain, and it contains the specific silence of a space that both sides are watching simultaneously from opposite directions at all times. The emptiness is performance. The emptiness is the most occupied space in France. Price was a mathematics teacher. He taught children. He stood in front of a blackboard in Wales with chalk on his jacket and explained to 9-year-olds that numbers are a language for describing the world with precision. He still believes this. He is applying it here. You are not sure the world he is describing with such precision is the same world everyone else is standing in. Price's pencil stopped mid-calculation. The calculation reached an answer and Price did not write the answer down. A man who teaches mathematics for a living and reaches an answer he does not write down has reached an answer he does not want to exist on paper. That is the moment you started watching Price differently. Night in the trench is different from night anywhere else. Night in the trench is a condition that requires work to survive. You must remain awake. You must remain alert. The darkness outside the parapet is not simply dark, it is dark with specific intent, occupied darkness, darkness being used by people who want you to not hear them coming. You must stay awake. You have been staying awake for 9 nights. The lantern flame bent. You watched it for 40 minutes. You watched the specific way it bent in the drafts that moved through the trench from the open top, each draft slightly different, each angle of bending slightly different, and you filed each variation because your nervous system has decided that all variation is information and all information must be processed. You have been awake so long that your brain has begun treating the lantern flame as threat data. You pressed your palms flat against the timber wall and held them there. You needed to feel something that did not move, something that was not you, something that confirmed the physical existence of the space around you without requiring you to do anything in response to it. The timber was cold and damp. It was the most stabilizing thing you touched that day. The tea is not tea. Nobody calls it that and everyone calls it that. It is warm and dark and comes in a tin mug and is the closest thing available to a category of comfort that no longer fully applies to this environment. You drink it with both hands around the mug and close your eyes for the duration of the warmth, and when you open them the trench is exactly where you left it. You have been awake so long that warmth has become its own emotional event. The steam from the tin mug hitting your face in the gray morning air is not just warmth. It is the confirmation that your face still exists in the sensory world, that there are still inputs that belong to the category of good rather than neutral or bad. You will remember that mug for longer than you will remember many things that happened that week. You and Price eat the hardtack biscuits at the same pace, with the same caution, without commenting on it. This is the specific intimacy of men in a trench, not friendship exactly, but the deep knowledge of each other's habits that comes from occupying the same 14 feet for 9 days. You know exactly how Price eats a biscuit. Price knows exactly how you do. Neither of you has said a word about it. Stand to. Both sides do this simultaneously every dawn, every man on every part of the Western Front, both Allied and German, at the fire step simultaneously, rifles at the parapet, watching the no man's land between them. Both sides know the other side is doing this. Everyone knows everyone is watching. The Dawn Stand-To is a performance of mutual awareness conducted by two armies every single morning from one end of France to the other. It has its own strange formality. Sergeant Howell looked at Price's face and took one step backward. Not from fear. From the specific recalibration of a man whose internal model of a situation has just been updated with data that doesn't fit the previous model. Howell has been here since 1914. Howell has seen everything. And something in Price's wide brown eyes updated Howell's model in a way that required one involuntary step. Price was standing at the fire step, but Price was not watching no man's land. This is the thing that made Howell stop. Price's eyes were open and Price was at the correct position and Price's rifle was in his hands and all of these things were correct. But Price was watching something that was not visible through the aperture. Price was watching something interior. And whatever it was very specific. Here is the fact nobody ever tells you about the Western Front. 306 British soldiers were executed by their own army during the First World War. Not by the enemy. By their own commanding officers. Many of them had simply broken, not from weakness, but from the specific physics of what a human nervous system does when exposed to industrial violence without interruption. The army had a term for this. They called it lacking moral fiber. It was not lack of fiber. It was being human. You looked at the strip of sky above the trench and found it insufficient. That is the specific feeling, not the sky being wrong, but the quantity of sky being wrong, the ratio of sky to trench being wrong, the sense that the available sky does not balance the available mud in any equation that produces a comfortable answer. You looked at it anyway. You had been looking at it for 9 days. Davies cleans his rifle the same way every time. Every component in the same order, laid on the same folded cloth, in the same sequence. You have watched him do it 4 times. The ritual is not about the rifle. The rifle is always clean. The ritual is about the act of doing something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. In a trench, tasks with beginnings, middles, and ends are the closest available approximation of a day that makes sense. Your hands are trembling at the fingertips. You noticed it on day 7 and have been cataloging it since. Not a shake. A fine tremor that is the residual signal of a nervous system that has been in active alert state for too long and is beginning to express the cost of that. Davies's hands do not tremble. You filed that information also. Not with judgment. With the specific careful noting of a man assessing his own condition the way a machine might assess its own components. When Howell put his hand on Price's shoulder and Price turned around and Howell stepped back, in that moment something changed in the section that nobody named out loud. The change had no words. It had a shape that everyone who was awake registered and filed without discussing. When a man who has survived 2 years on the Western Front takes one step backward from a 22-year-old former schoolteacher from Wales, the information that transmits through that step is significant. The gray eyes of Sergeant Howell are the eyes of a man who has replaced everything else with pattern recognition. 2 years of the Western Front does not make a man feel less. It makes a man process more. The gray eyes process everything. And the gray eyes, in the moment after Howell stepped back, were processing something they did not have a previous pattern for. That was the thing. The absence of a matching pattern. In a man who had seen everything. By day 9 the trench at night has its own grammar and you have learned it completely. The sounds that are safe and the sounds that are not safe. The distance a sound needs to be irrelevant and the distance it needs to be to require response. You have learned this grammar without being taught it, the way you learn the grammar of any language you are forced to live inside. And on day 9 evening, something in the trench's grammar was wrong. The sky seen from inside a trench is not the same sky as the sky above it. The sky above a trench is a corridor, narrow, framed, moving above you while you remain fixed. It is the sky of a creature that lives in the earth looking up. It is the sky of something that used to be above the ground and is not anymore. You have been looking at this sky for 9 days. You have learned its specific quality of distance. Howell gave you your night watch assignment and his gray eyes held on your face for 1 extra beat while he did it. Not suspicion. Assessment. The triage that Howell runs on every face every day, updated with the current condition of the man in front of him. You passed whatever the assessment was. Howell moved on. You filed the extra beat anyway. On day 9 you file everything. Night watch in the trench on the Western Front in 1916 is a specific kind of alone that exists nowhere else. You and one other man, awake, standing at the parapet, watching absolute darkness for the sounds and shapes that will not come until they are already on top of you. The 9 men behind you are not available. The night is yours. The darkness is yours. Every minute of it. By day 9 your senses have been recalibrated so far past normal function that you are receiving information the conscious mind does not normally have access to. The fine differences in air pressure. The specific character of silence in different directions. The way the darkness in one sector of no man's land feels different from the darkness in another sector, and what that difference might mean. You are not hallucinating. You are perceiving. The line between the two is thinner than it sounds. Price was not at the fire step. Price was standing with his back to no man's land, facing the communication trench behind you, in the dark. Not moving. Listening. To something behind your position that you had spent 9 days being certain was safe because it was behind you. The absolute certainty of the direction of danger is the first thing the trench teaches you. And Price, on the 9th night, was standing with his back to the established certainty. Price's lips moved in the dark. The arithmetic. The private calculation that was the last remaining habit of his other life. And Price's lips stopped. And Price's head came level. And Price's wide brown eyes found your eyes across the dark trench. And in the specific grammar of 2 men in a trench at the end of 9 sleepless days, what passed between those 2 pairs of eyes in that moment carried more information than any word either of them could have formed. Price said the numbers are wrong. He said he had been doing them wrong. Not panicking. Not frightened. Stating a correction to a calculation he had been making for days, with the level tone of a teacher who has found an error in yesterday's lesson and is simply noting it for the record. The error was the direction. The threat direction. For 9 days Price had been calculating the wrong direction. You turned from the parapet. You had spent 9 days facing the parapet. The act of turning your back to no man's land and facing your own communication trench was a physical reorientation of everything the trench had trained you to be. Your rifle came with you. Your body understood Price's calculation before your mind finished processing it. The body, after 9 days in a trench, knows things the mind has not caught up to yet. Davies woke instantly. That is the specific gift of the Western Front to the men who survive long enough. The replacement of the slow gradient of normal waking with the immediate complete alertness of a system that can no longer afford the luxury of gradual consciousness. Davies was awake and armed and reading the situation in the time it takes most people to understand that they have opened their eyes. The communication trench entrance was dark and silent. 4 men staring at it. The sounds from inside it were ambiguous, not clearly footsteps, not clearly nothing, occupying the specific category of sound that the sleep-deprived mind most struggles with, the category of I cannot tell. For men who have been awake for 9 days, staring at a dark entrance, trying to categorize a sound that refused categorization. This is what the Western Front had made them. This is what it had required them to become. Your rifle moved. Not from a decision. From a recalibration. The body updated the threat direction and the rifle followed. 9 days of training your hands to point the rifle toward no man's land, and in one moment, on the word of a 22-year-old former schoolteacher from Wales, your hands pointed it somewhere else. That is the specific trust that a trench builds between men. Not affection. Something more functional and more absolute than affection. Howell woke and read the situation in one motion. That is 2 years of the Western Front operating exactly as it was designed to operate. Howell did not ask. Howell did not need to ask. The positions of the bodies told him everything. The direction 4 men were facing told him everything. Howell moved to the communication entrance and raised his hand, and the section held. Still. Quiet. Waiting. Sergeant Howell's gray eyes in the dark, watching the communication trench entrance, are the most experienced pair of eyes in this section by a distance that cannot be measured in years alone. 2 years on the Western Front is not 2 years. It is a different unit of time entirely, a unit that has no name because no one before 1914 had the data to create it. Howell's eyes had accumulated that unit. And the eyes were telling Howell something they did not have a clean category for. Price pointed at the sky. Not at the communication trench. At the sky above a specific section of the trench, the forward section, the section ahead of the current position, the section into which they were about to be ordered. Price's slim finger, precise and deliberate, indicated the sky with the certainty of a man who has completed a calculation and is indicating the answer on a board. Price was not afraid. Price had passed through fear some time ago and come out the other side into a different kind of clarity. The runner emerged from the communication trench covered in mud and shaking and carrying the orders that would reorient everything the next 24 hours was going to be. This is how the Western Front communicated with itself in 1916, young men running through dark corridors with folded paper in their hands, the paper containing decisions made by people who would never stand in the positions those decisions applied to. The runner handed the paper to Howell, and the runner's hand was shaking. Howell's was not. Howell read the orders. You watched the back of Howell's head while he read. You watched the shoulders. You have learned to read Howell from behind because Howell's face rarely tells you what Howell's body tells you if you know how to watch it. The shoulders did not change while Howell read. That was information. The shoulders not changing meant Howell had been expecting something approximately like this. Howell had been doing his own arithmetic. Howell's gray eyes came up from the paper. The eyes found your face first. You do not know why your face first. You held the gaze for the 2 seconds it was offered and took from it what it contained. What it contained was not reassurance. What it contained was acknowledgement. In a trench, acknowledgement is the senior currency. Reassurance is a luxury nobody can afford. 10 minutes. 2 words. The entire section in motion. This is what months of the Western Front builds in 11 men, not courage, not heroism. Those are the words the newspaper uses, but the automatic implementation of instruction in conditions that the body's every system is simultaneously arguing against. The body wants to stay. The orders say move. After enough time in the trench, the orders win every time. Not because the body agrees. Because the body has been retrained. The section preparing to move is a specific kind of controlled activity that you can now read like text. Who is ready first tells you who has been ready for some time, who accepted the order before it arrived. Price is already ready. Price has been ready. Davies moves through his kit check with the systematic speed of a man who has made peace with the sequence. Your own hands move more carefully, repeating each step once, making sure. 9 days without sleep makes a man very careful about making sure. Your hands repeated the bolt check. Completed it and then repeated it. The specific compulsion of a sleep-deprived mind that cannot trust its own record of having just done something, the action happened, but the recording of the action is unreliable, so the action needs to happen again. You knew this was happening. You let it happen. Your hands stopped. The bolt was checked. The rifle was ready. You were ready. Price touched your arm. Not to say anything that words would help. To acknowledge that two men standing in a trench at the end of the 9th night, about to move forward into the 10th, have shared something that has no name in any of the languages either of them grew up speaking. A former mathematics teacher from Wales and a man whose boots are caked in 9 days of French mud, standing together for one moment in the lantern light before the trench takes them forward again. The communication trench in single file at night, moving forward, this is the shape of the Western Front at its most essential. 11 men in a corridor 4 feet wide, 3 feet apart, moving by sound and touch and the specific trust that the man ahead of you is still moving. The stars above the trench are the only fixed point. You count the steps. You count without knowing you are counting. On day 9 your mind counts everything. Your face moving through the communication trench in the dark, the timber walls passing close on both sides, the stars cold and clear above the narrow corridor of sky. This is the last image of the place you have occupied for 9 days. You are leaving the trench you know for the trench you don't. The trench you don't is 40 yards closer to the German line. The trench you don't is where Price's mathematics pointed. You are moving toward the answer Price has already calculated. The advanced sap line. Shallower walls. Wider sky. The German line visible for the first time as more than a dark suggestion, close enough now that the wire is individual strands rather than a dark mass. Close enough that silence between both sides is not the silence of distance but the silence of proximity. The 11 men of the section take their positions along the narrow forward trench and the sky above them is enormous and cold and full of stars. You have not slept in 9 days. Night 10 has begun. You are 40 yards further forward than you have ever been. The sky is bigger here. The enemy line is closer here. Price is at the far end of the forward position, already at the fire step, already looking out, already still in the way Price is still now, with the calm of a man who has finished the calculation and accepted the answer and is simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. You take your position. The wind comes across no man's land and it carries, faintly, on the edge of perception, sounds. The worst part? You have not slept in 9 days. And night 10 has only just begun.